Top 10 ways ADHD presents in boys. Difficulty with self-directed talk. So we all have this internal dialogue in our head that we use to talk to ourselves. When somebody has ADHD, they're not always hearing that internal dialogue. I call this brain coach with kids, and what I explain to kids is that when your brain works with ADHD, what that means is that the volume on your brain coach is turned down a little too low. So the self-directed talk is there, they're just not always hearing it, particularly when they're bored or disengaged from something. So if you've ever said to your son, "Why did you do that?" and he says, "I don't know," he might actually be telling the truth. He might not realize why he did something because there wasn't much of an internal dialogue going on in his head before he did whatever it was. Hyper-focusing on things that are interesting to them and difficulty sustaining attention to things that are not interesting. I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise to any of you. One of the things I do want to tell you about this is that parents say to me, "Well, how do I help my son concentrate better?" And here's my one answer for it. Medication is what's going to help your son be able to sustain attention to things that aren't interesting to him. People say, "Oh, well, you don't have to do medicine, there's mindfulness, this and that." I will tell you, I have never found anything else that truly works for this except medication and helping kids develop their internal dialogue, their brain coach. And that's a long process. The other thing I want to mention is that if your son tends to hyper-focus on things that are interesting to him, that could really help him one day, because one of the things for people with ADHD is when they find something they're good at and they hyper-focus on it, that can help them be really successful in life. The other thing with this is if you've ever asked your son to get off of, video games and he has a blow up at you, the reason for that is because you're asking him to transition from a preferred task to a non-preferred task without much notice. Episodic memory. Episodic memory is the way we remember past experiences and the emotions associated with those past experiences. So for kids with ADHD, they have difficulty recalling episodic memory. The one caveat to this is if there's a strong emotion attached to it, then they have an easier time remembering it. So if you've explained something to your son or asked your son to do something and he says, "I don't remember how to do it," it might be that he doesn't want to do it, but it might be that he doesn't recall how he did it in the past. Or if you say to him, "We're going to go to this restaurant and he really liked it last time," and he says, "Oh, I don't really want to go there," and you say, "But you really liked it last time," he might not remember that because it wasn't a strong enough emotion attached to it. So with episodic memory, what we have to do is help connect those past experiences and emotions with past experiences to the present or the near future. Future thinking skills. So people with ADHD have difficulty visualizing things in the future because they tend to live in the present. So like we talked about before, they have difficulty with episodic memory, remembering things in the past or how they did things in the past, and they have difficulty with visualizing things in the future. If you've ever tried things with your son, like saying, if you do your homework, every night, then you can get a reward at the end of the week, and those things tend to not work, the reason why is because that incentive is too far in the future for him to visualize. Or if you've tried things like star charts, reward charts, and they never seem to work, that's why, because there's too much time between when the thing happens he's supposed to do and when the actual reward is. So what we have to do is we have to meet kids where they're at in terms of their ability to visualize the future, which is probably a lot less than you think. If you Google this, you'll find a lot of resources that shows you how far ahead kids can think into the future. The other thing I want to mention is if your son's ever done homework but didn't hand it in, the reason why is not necessarily that he forgot to hand it in, it's because he wasn't visualizing himself handing in the homework, sensing the passage of time. So have you ever said to your son, "I need you to do this chore and it's going to take 10 minutes, and he says, "Oh, it's going to take an hour," or maybe he spends more time arguing about it than the task would actually take? The reason why is because people with ADHD have difficulty feeling time as a concrete concept. A lot of times what they'll do is spend more time arguing about something than the task will actually take because they have difficulty conceptualizing how long it will take. We can teach kids how to start to feel time, and stay tuned at the end, I'm going to tell you how. Situational awareness. Have you ever seen your son, walk into the street without looking both ways, or maybe you're walking in a parking lot and he's not paying attention to what's happening around him, or maybe he's in an unstructured social situation and doesn't know what to do with himself? The reason for that is because he has difficulty with situational awareness. I call situational awareness reading the field with kids. And what situational awareness is how we take different pieces of information in our environment, put them together as a whole, and make meaning of them. So If somebody has difficulty organizing all that information in their head, or if they have difficulty understanding the bigger picture of things because they tend to focus on small details, which is what a lot of kids with ADHD do, they're likely going to have difficulty with situational awareness. So this is a concept I teach kids, and what I teach them is read the field and figure out what you're supposed to be doing right now. So what that really is, it's building situational awareness, and it's also teaching context as well, perspective taking skills. So if your son has difficulty reading social cues, I have news for you. It's not really that he has difficulty reading social cues, he has difficulty with perspective taking. So understanding others' thoughts and feelings and understanding how he comes across to others. Sometimes I will see parents of kids with ADHD say, my son lacks empathy. And I want to be really clear, it's not that your son lacks empathy, it's that he lacks perspective taking skills. And please don't tell people that he lacks empathy, because in reality, I find actually that most kids with ADHD have a lot of empathy. When kids have difficulty with perspective taking, a lot of times when they're younger, they might do something that upsets other kids or makes other kids feel uncomfortable, and those other kids react to it, and then they think that they're being bullied because they have difficulty understanding how their words or behavior affected others. So if your son says he's being bullied a lot, that might be because he's causing a reaction in other kids and not understanding why they're reacting to him that way. This is also something that can be taught, and it's one of the main things I focus on with the kids I work with. Putting problem size in a relevant context. This is another one I'm sure you've experienced if your son sometimes struggles with emotional regulation. A lot of times kids with ADHD have difficulty putting problem size in a relevant context, so that's why they might overreact to things, or even in some cases might underreact to things. So what we have to do is we have to teach kids how to match their reaction to the actual size of the problem. Difficulty with transitions from preferred tasks to non-preferred tasks, or difficulty with unexpected change. So as I mentioned earlier, lots of kids with ADHD have difficulty visualizing the future. So what tends to happen is when there's an unexpected change, that kind of throws them off. Or when they have to do something like get off video games to start homework, then that is really challenging, and that's why they have a reaction to it, because they're going from a preferred task to a non-preferred task and didn't have time to prepare for that transition. This is another thing that can be taught, and I have a great strategy for this that works really well. You'll learn about at the end. Rejection sensitive dysphoria. You've probably heard about this one because it's been getting a lot of press in the last year or so. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is a term used to describe how people with ADHD have a propensity to react strongly to perceived rejection or actual rejection. I see this all the time with kids, and sometimes I'll see that if, a kid asks another kid to play with him and he says no, he'll have this really big reaction to it and get really upset. Or if, they see one of their friends, hanging out with somebody else, they'll get really upset about that because they perceive it as rejection. So people with ADHD, as I mentioned, tend to live in strong emotions, and they tend to have a big reaction to perceived rejection. And that's something that we have to teach and help them understand people's intentions and understand that maybe, somebody wasn't trying to, hurt your feelings or reject you. Maybe they just wanted to do something else. I saved this one for last because it's one I really want you to think about. There's an opposite of rejection sensitive dysphoria, and it's called recognition response euphoria. Essentially what that means is that people with ADHD tend to be really responsive to praise and recognition. So here's what I want you to understand. When we give recognition for things and give praise, it has to be purposeful. So saying things to your son like, you're so smart, that's not purposeful praise. That's what I call empty praise. Or if your son makes self-defeating comments and he says, I'm an idiot, and you say, no, you're not, right? That's empty reassurance. What we want to do is we want to give recognition and praise for things that are tangible, because the way somebody actually builds their self-confidence is recognizing their strengths in themselves. So let me show you what the language for this would sound like. So for example, if your son was working on a history project for a long time, you could say, hey, I saw you were really working on that history project for a long time and you were really putting a lot of effort into it. Or, let's say he was at swimming practice, you can say, I saw that you were really working hard at getting better at your stroke today, and I'm really proud of you for that. Or if he sat through something that was really boring, I would say, I know that being at your doctor's appointment and having to sit in the waiting room for so long was really boring, and I noticed what a good job you did using your brain coach to help yourself get through the boredom. So what I really want you to do is give your son recognition for things that require effort and for things that require self-regulation. So the more you can give him recognition for these things and things that are purposeful, the more it's going to help build his self-confidence.